Okay, so good morning, everybody. My name, or good afternoon if you're following from China. My name is Alessio Pettino. I am the knowledge coordinator of the USME Center in Beijing. And it is my great pleasure to be here today and to moderate this great event that we're going to do. So this event, today's topic, we can change slide, please. It's about government affairs, government engagement, and strategic communication. So how SMEs can actively engage Chinese authorities during their operations, during their business. And this is a topic of great importance, which very often is not, it's a bit underestimated by SMEs. But in practice, we will see later today that there are concrete actions that even SMEs with smaller budgets can do and which will bring real benefits. We have two great speakers today, and we're very happy to have them here. The first part will be the first part of this event will focus more on the role that business organizations like China Chamber of Commerce or the China-Britain Business Council, which is our partner for this event, can play for the activities of SMEs, while the second presentation will be more on specific actions that SMEs can do, how to deal, what kind of channels are available for SMEs to engage with the government, how to strengthen corporate reputation, how to, we will also have a lot of concrete examples, also how to deal with crisis. And then there will be a discussion at the end. And before starting, I would like to spend a couple of minutes on the SME Center, the EU SME Center. For those of you who don't know us, the EU SME Center is a project funded by the European Union. It has been around for 11 years already. We are on the third phase, and there will be a fourth phase starting next year. So we will be around for 3 years more. Yes, we are implemented by a consortium of 5 chambers of commerce and business organizations, one of which, of course, you will see them on the bottom, and one of them is CBC, who is partnering with us today. We partner with many organizations, Enterprise Europe Network, as well as Chinese government agencies, business support organizations for various activities, and we have a physical office in Beijing. We're also doing this event today in CBC office in Beijing. Next slide, please. Very quickly, we have 4 types of services, all of them free of charge. If you are European SME or business associations, you can come to us and enjoy these services. We have a knowledge center. Basically, we write reports, case studies, guidelines on different sectors, different topics, but all relating to how to access the Chinese market or how to maybe about new regulations and so on. In the advice center, we have sort of help desk where SMEs can contact us with questions on any issues, any problems they have, and we have a team of experts that will answer these questions for free. And they also include technical questions, like, for instance, what kind of standard do I need to comply with for my product, or my product is subject to customs, or and so on. Training center, like today, we do events, workshops on different topics, and we also have an advocacy platform. We also have a working group through which we try to disseminate information about draft call for comments on draft regulations and so on. Next slide, please. Maybe, yes, just a very quick overview. We are going to do a lot of events. We're doing also one tomorrow in Nanjing, hybrid event, and then the offline part in Nanjing. So if you're around, you're very welcome to attend. It will be about HR and how certain working practices changing, in particular after COVID. Then there will be other events, mostly online. Of course, there were supposed to be many events in a trade fair in Shanghai in early December, but we were notified this morning that the trade fair was canceled. So we will still do those events maybe at a later stage, and we will publish those information on our website. We do reports. We have recently completed one, which is about public incentives, subsidies, and funding instruments that technology tech SMEs can obtain in China. And this is a pretty important component also of today's event. This is also something you can get actually from doing active government affairs. I mentioned matchmaking was cancelled. And we also have a self-diagnosis tool for people who are not yet in China. They can basically test their knowledge of China. We provide suggestions and so on. Can you change slide, please? So yeah, this is a hybrid event. We have a small audience here in Beijing, but the part of the audience will be online. Please submit questions at any time, and we will have a discussion later. But we invite you to start sending questions already now, because if time is limited, we will give priority to the questions asked first. Yes, so now we can move into the event. The first speaker will be Joe Cash, who is a policy analyst at CBC, China Britain Business Council. He graduated from University of Oxford, and he has worked for the Confederation of British Industries, still in the policy sector. And maybe I will stop here. Maybe you would like to introduce yourself in a better way, probably. So yeah, thank you for doing this today, and yeah, for this. Hey.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alessio, and good morning if you're joining us from Europe. Good afternoon if you're also here joining us in China. So my name is Joe Cash, and I'm the policy analyst for CBC China, working in the team that handles our advocacy, government affairs, and trade policy research work. And today I'm going to try to whistle through advocacy for beginners in around 20 minutes, and then I believe we have about 15 minutes for questions. Serena, can I have first slide? Yeah. So I'm going to start in a very boring way with a few definitions, because I think it's important to break down what advocacy is, particularly because it's different in China to how you might approach advocacy if you're in the UK or if you're in another European country. And apologies, I will talk a lot about the UK. Please bear with me. And so, first of all, if you're an SME, I think it's important to distinguish what advocacy is so that you can set budgets appropriately depending on what tangible outcomes you might be able to receive as a result of having invested in it. Because in China, to be very direct, dare I say blunt, unless you are an SME that just so happens to be Apple's division responsible for making AirPods, small companies are less likely than large to be able to advocate in a way that sees China buy more of your product or receive any preferential treatment. Advocacy is also not complaining about business environment in China or about the political environment or about what's going wrong, what's going right. To my mind, corporate advocacy in China can be best broken down to the definition on the screen: ensuring that your company is being treated fairly under the law and has equal access to all that it is entitled to. So compared to perhaps premonitions of advocates and taking on the law, or other uses of that term in China, that is what I would say it can be understood as, and is the definition that we most often use at CBBC. So what do I mean when I say that it's ensuring that your company is being treated fairly and is having equal access to what it's entitled to? Next button. So I thought I would be back. There's a lot of clicking, so I thought I would be doing it. So some of the things that you can expect to have some success in advocating for is your company. So does your company have fair access to subsidies? Has your company applied to some licenses? And is there a lack of transparency over where your company is in that application cycle? Or indeed, have foreign companies in your sector not been offered licenses that they otherwise should be? Depending on what city you are in, are you eligible for any tax breaks? Are you investing in a sector or area where the government is incentivizing foreign technology and investment? In the same line, what financing might be available to you as an SME in any given sector? And then the ones on the other side are perhaps more advanced. Are you looking into the regulatory and legal landscape and feel that there's insufficient transparency regarding regulations that apply to your business? Hopefully this one doesn't apply to you, but have you, Are you facing legal issues, and do you suspect that you are not receiving fair treatment under various Chinese laws, the most common of which would be the Civil Code, I believe, with SME? Are you struggling to have products certified or to get trademarks? And finally, are you unable to access standard settings committees, which could have a significant bearing on the ability of your company to sell into this market, particularly if you're in, say, bioengineering or a particularly high technologically involved area. So that's kind of the premise for today. Is it's not so much a question of so how can SMEs advocate for themselves? Well, I think there are 6 ways that you can try doing this as a smaller organization. And the first one is strength in numbers. As I just mentioned, there is a clear, when we're discussing with the government, preference for large organizations that are big investors or that have particular expertise in an area where Chinese partners or the government as a whole wants to acquire. And the easiest way for an SME to get around this is to join a business organization. And as Alessio already mentioned, there are many, even within the there's the EU SME Centre, there's CBBC and its other partners, but then there is also a business organisation for almost every single EU member state. So I encourage you to look at what yours is and what they do. But strength in numbers is a good way of being able to boost your advocacy capacity. And I will talk a little bit more on the role of foreign business organizations in China later. The next is knowing your rights, keeping abreast of regulatory developments. China is a market with a very fast-paced regulatory environment, and you cannot know what you're entitled to and what you're not entitled to unless you are already aware of the changes in regulation in your industry. And there was a lot of regulation that is currently being developed and updated, particularly when it comes to data transfer and IP and kind of licensing for factories and different industries. And towards the end of this presentation, I include a series of resources that you can check out. They're in English, which provide translations of the latest piece of regulation that might impact your business. And it's also worth being aware that regulation in China in certain instances is less developed than what you might be used to in Europe, and is changing, and often there are not long lead times before the regulations change. So coming into the China market or being successful in the China market relies on you having done a lot of reading and keeping abreast of these developments. The third one, being able to talk the talk. Chinese language skills are unfortunately, or fortunately, vital. And if you're to enter the market and be successful here, you will need to have native Mandarin speakers on your payroll, or those who have exceptionally good Chinese language abilities. Preferably someone who has done time within the Chinese government or a government-associated think tank, and knows the language of the government, what certain expressions mean, how to draft documents in a way that they will appeal to the regulators, to party secretaries, whomever you are appealing to in your city, province, the national level. We were discussing just before, but over the last week, of course, there has been the plenum meeting, and that the party uses a language which in Chinese means something totally different to translation, to its translation into English. The best example is in the communique and referendum resolution that went out recently on the party's history. The party history does not mean the history of the Communist Party. Party history means how the Communist Party fits into a broader history of the development of communism internationally. Think of it as kind of like a Marvel movie. What is canon as far as the party is concerned? And there are more of these differences in language as you go into discussing kind of various policy areas Another one is recently in Pudong, they announced a plan to pursue socialist modernization, which at first listen doesn't sound like a great opportunity for financial services and law firms, financial services providers and law firms. And yet pursuing socialist modernization might be very profitable if you're a foreign law firm or bank. So it's being able to distinguish what is language that is being kind of disseminated from the party and bears little relevance to business, and what is language that is aimed at appealing to the party and will have a big impact on your ability to get along with them. The next one is showing your best side, and it's quite linked to the importance of Chinese language. It's linked with the importance of Chinese language skills. You have to be able to increase your visibility with officials. Easy ways of doing that are site visits that are often organized by local government bodies and foreign business organizations. And many of them may seem irrelevant to the industry you're in, going to visit a plant in Wuxi or a special economic development zone, which is unrelated to your line of work. But this quid pro quo kind of exists with the party. You have to show that you are willing to go and see what projects are being rolled out, and that you are interested in the mutual development of both your business and the area that's invested in. And this is a great opportunity to get some face time with the relevant officials and to also be able to, in a less official way, put forward your company's wants and concerns. If there is a trip to an FTZ and you're aware that foreign enterprises are eligible for tax break there, that is the time to put it forward. Increasingly, being able to understand the political landscape is important. We have seen over the last year in particular that China is moving in a far more autarkic direction. There clearly are sectors where it is trying to appeal to foreign investors and those where foreign investors are less welcome. The European Chamber of Commerce has a very good analogy of this. If you imagine a plane, there are those that are in the executive lounge who are highly sought after. And then it's a descending scale to those who are in the cargo hold industries that China is trying to kind of replace foreign investors with its domestic capability. If you are considering entering the China market, I would advise you to spend a long time considering the political landscape and how welcome foreign investment in that area is. If your business is in something particularly technological and niche, so I was previously supporting an SME that was doing stem cell research, you would stand a higher chance, for instance, of finding that you are in the executive lounge. But then you might also find, after reading about political developments in the export control law and the human genetics management, I can't remember, regulations, that actually over the last year, foreign investment in that line of work has become harder. So you need to pay attention to what's happening in politics and how that is impacting regulation. National security concerns in particular are beginning to have a significant bearing on the regulatory environment, even in areas where you might think that that's an overreach. The export of soil, for example, is a national security concern in China. So it can be hard to understand where your business fits in the broader political landscape. And how to fail. I think case study analysis is very valuable in China. Identify what went wrong for other SMEs. Did they have their intellectual property stolen? Did they enter into a poor joint venture? And all of these things can be turned around to be successes. I'm quite often explaining to companies how if you enter into a joint venture partnership with the ambition being that your Chinese joint venture is adding to your capacity, then that can be a benefit. There is, I think, or there used to be at least, this presumption that joint venture partnerships hampered foreign companies and that there were risks associated with forced technology transfer. That has improved with the introduction of foreign investment law and seems to be less of a concern. I think it's also because companies have smartened up the idea that you can partner with a Chinese firm to your advantage. So learning how others failed will help you. Last one, which is a harsh reality, unfortunately, is it is important to have a product that China actually wants. The days where China was a consumer market of 1.2 billion and all foreign products were seen to be preferable over Chinese alternatives is gone. I have written about this on our website, the phenomenon of Warchow, meaning the rise of the national brands, particularly amongst millennials and Generation Z consumers. That whereas previously a made in China logo used to be a sign perhaps something was of poorer quality, it is now seen as more of a badge of honor, and the Huawei Apple example is very good. Both used to have 14% market share in 2015. I believe that Huawei is now on 39% market share and Apple is down on 8%. And that is pretty much down to the fact that this Warchow phenomenon has directed consumers towards the Chinese product. So foreign business organizations, and how can they help out? Well, really, they can help with all of the aforementioned points. Here at CCPIT, we regularly provide our members with updates on the latest in China's regulatory environment, political environment, geopolitics. We organize municipal dialogues with local government that I will talk about later in more detail. We also organize site visits and trips to trade zones, and we try to facilitate conversations with local government and national government as often as possible on a general level, but also on a sector by sector basis. We have various working groups, be they in Beijing, Shanghai, or in Guangzhou, and then we also have sectoral work. And this is not an offering that is unique to CBBC. I know that the European Chamber also offers them. So there is a way to get involved, be you a British business or European. In China in particular, these national business organizations tend to work closely with their respective embassies to provide a route from business into government. I am regularly in conversation with the British and European embassies, and also with those from third nations, to discuss the latest in if China is planning on making changes to various trade defense instruments, if the market access negative list is coming out, the foreign investor negative list is coming out. We feed the views of our members direct into both the British and the Chinese government so they can make representations. And this is a great way for your company to be able to actually actively affect change in China's regulatory environment. And then we also convene meetings with different arms of the Chinese government independently. So over the last year, or this year rather, we've had meetings with Premier Li Keqiang, with Vice Premier Hu Chunhua, with the chairman of MOFCOM, CSRC. We've also had municipal dialogues with the Beijing, Shanghai, Charlie, I'm looking to you now, Shenzhen, local, Guangzhou local governments. And we invite our members to join us there. And of course, that is where your company gets on the list, which is something that I will talk about again more in a minute. So the thing, business dialogues, these are a great way of getting your company in front of the Chinese government. Because one of the things to consider is that the Chinese government is not actually an impregnable monolith. It is vast, and there are parts of it that are more welcoming to SMEs and foreign investors than others. And I will recommend some in a minute. But essentially, when we hold these dialogues, we produce a list of companies that join with us. And while perhaps 10 companies will be speaking directly to the government, a further 70 will be on the list that is passed to them. And I cannot underestimate the importance of being on this list. While it may seem disappointing that your company was not invited to speak directly, you will likely receive a follow-up from the ministry in question, because a lot of inverted commas lobbying in China happens in exchanges held weeks after the set piece meetings. Government does have a tendency to follow up with companies, and we produce these long documents going through each sector explaining what the companies, be they anonymized entries or unanonymized in those sectors, feel about developments there, the changes they would like, where they feel they're being treated unfairly, and it does result in tangible results. We had a meeting in Guangzhou recently where one British company was notified the tax bureau that they were eligible for tax breaks because the product that they produced was actually on the insurance list where you do not have to pay tax. And tax bureau came back and said, yes, you are eligible for this tax break. Let's take this offline and see if we can sort that out for you, which is what happened. So there are ways of getting your point across to the Chinese government. It is not, this all-powerful, we will tell you, how it's going to be organization. There are ways in, there are friendlier aspects to it. So, for example, for SMEs, I would recommend the China Council for the Promotion of International Trade as particularly friendly. They have representatives in all major cities and also in some embassies in Europe. So it might be worth contacting. But now turning our attention to advocating from Europe, because there are ways of doing it. And I'm going to start with the most abstract, which is that SMEs have become very popular amongst trade policy planners. And going back to the role of business organizations, even if you're not in China, so looking to join CBBC or the European Chamber or benefit from the help of the EU SME Centre, there are national and multilateral business organizations which are beginning to look at the role of SMEs in trade policy and negotiations. And every country has one. The UK's is CBI, French is MEDEF, and these are all overseen by a parent organization called Business Europe. Business Europe feeds into the European Council and DG Trade. So when there are negotiations bilaterals between China and Europe, the points of their members are included. Before I worked for CBBC, I used to work for CBI. So I can tell you with confidence that if you put your point into your national business organization, that will then get escalated to Business Europe, which will then be escalated to DG Trade, and then hopefully included in DG Trade's appeal representation to the Chinese government when and if that happens. Should click through on this. The other point to mention is parliamentarians are also beginning to pay greater attention to the ways that trade negotiations can be used to support SMEs. And that's largely in part because it has become more popular in trade negotiation for geopolitical reasons, particularly the European Union is trying to take trade deals further and include provisions for SMEs, environmental protection, labour rights, and other countries are playing catch up. China is one of them, Japan as well. And so, for example, in the UK, we now have a parliamentary export programme where MPs are encouraged to hold events with their constituents so that they can talk about ways that their MP could represent them to the Department for International Trade to bolster kind of their sector in UK representations to China on trade policy. And I'm very aware that trade policy and negotiation might seem very abstract, but it can actually result in tangible benefits for SMEs. And if you know the route in, then it's not something that takes a lot of time. If you are aware of who your local MP is, or you are aware of who your local representative is in your National Business Federation, then it can be as little as sending an email or attending one event a quarter. And if you don't believe me, then that is the text from the negotiation objectives of the UK Free Trade Agreement with Japan on NFT SMEs. What's on the slide? And I just want to finish as I think the most important thing, and something that can be done for free, is being able to read up on all of this so you're abreast of ways that you can actually advocate, be it knowing your rights, so knowing how the laws are changing, knowing what laws are coming in, what laws create problems for your business, what laws could make things easier for you, knowing how the political business environment is changing, and some resources that can help you advocate from Europe. And I'm happy to share these slides with anybody joining us today so that you can click through to those links. But to very quickly run through them, MPC Observer is a great free-to-use website where they include every law that's going through Chinese Parliament, a short text on how it has changed over the various readings, when it's likely to go through. Digi China, if you're in the technology space, then that has everything you could need on data protection regulation, export controls, on tech products, tech transfer. The China Law blog, that is everything you would want on, say, employing local staff, IP protection, the kind of nuts and bolts issues that might affect a European SME in China. Rouse, they're an IP firm. And then kind of on your politics and business, of course, we've got CBBC's Focus magazine that includes regular articles, the China Business Brief podcast, where I interview business leaders, politicians, academics on what's happening in China's business, political and social affairs. And then Reuters Newswire, there's very little that happens in China that goes unreported by Reuters. So I cannot recommend them more. And then finally, do contact your local MP and Chinese embassy, because they would also be keen to hear from you. And I can talk perhaps a bit later about the ways that CDBC has been supporting British businesses connect with their local parliamentarian, embassy, or consulates general. But I think I'll wrap up there. If there's any questions.
Sure. Thank you, Joe, for the presentation. If there are any questions from the audience, please, I would invite you to write them in the Q&A chat. Maybe I have one to start. I particularly like your comment when you say that Chinese government administrations can actually be very supportive. You provided an example of the tax break in Guangzhou. And I think from our experience, sometimes this sounds pretty logical, but sometimes we notice that some people are kind of scared. There's still this idea that, oh, the government maybe is not going to help me, or this kind of big entity, But actually, I think they can really be very supportive. And then we also know, like from the experience of the US SME Center, we are contact basically every week from different districts, from different cities, from different parks, different zones that they want to meet up with us. Say, hey, of course, they want to bring more investment into their areas, but they also at the same time they ask for suggestions. They ask us suggestions. So, what do you think? How do you think I can be more attractive for companies? How do you think I can manage to? What do you think are the problems that I can try to solve in order to attract for investment? Of course. So they can really be very, very supportive, and sometimes they're also very open to discuss issues. So particularly like that aspect. My question now is, how do you think, you mentioned you have a lot of dialogues with different governments, how effective do you think these are? For instance, like I've managed to have a dialogue with the municipal administration here in Beijing or all the cities. You might have companies speaking, but how do you think these concerns that you advocate, that you express during these venues are really taken into account? How effective they are?
Well, this is also the question we have on the screen, so it's clearly on people's minds. Okay. I think they're very effective. And I'll try to answer both in one go on that the Chinese government organs are rather hermetic. Do you have any recommendations or tips on how to do research and get there? So first of all, with these kind of dialogues, I think for an SME, the most beneficial one is going to be a site visit. But unfortunately, you don't get anything for free. So these site visits, they have a dual purpose. On the one hand, it's to show business the wonderful ecosystem within which they could be part of, for example. But on the other hand, there's also a kind of tacit political aspect to it, which is that the local government wants to demonstrate how it has rolled out a particular policy. And it is a showcase zone. And one of their KPIs will be we have shown X number of foreign firms. This, administrative area where they can invest and receive preferential policies. And it might have nothing to do with your business whatsoever, and it will normally involve spending perhaps a morning, a day, walking around as part of a large delegation with local government officials, looking at something that is not of interest to you. But that is the environment where you get small talk, where you get the opportunity to talk about what you're finding is going well, what you're finding is, a challenge for you, and you get on the all-important list that I keep talking about, where there will be follow-up and there will be more opportunities to kind of put forward more concerns, and you've clearly done your time. And it's a cliche, but China is a relationship-driven business environment, so you need to put in the time first with the local government, the kind of regulators that it is worth you speaking to, before they are then going to take your opinions on the business environment and the regulatory regime seriously. Then in terms of success, when we have our business dialogues, you have a much higher chance of being successful if you have clearly done your research and you are, coming back to my original definition of advocacy, asking for something for which there is a clear, well, there was a clear mutual benefit, but also it is clear that under the law you are entitled to it. So if you can point out that of this clause 5 of regulation X says that all businesses, be they foreign or domestic, are eligible for a tax break in whichever city, and you have not been able to receive this tax break, or the tax bureau has not come back to you, then you have a good chance of getting what you're asking for. If you are speaking to the government and you just say, well, we're finding it very difficult to move capital out of China, well, you're not going to get that. There are political and economic reasons as to why it's difficult to move capital out of China. If you just come with complaints, and even points that you think are valid, or indeed might even improve the Chinese economy, that's not going to work. China adopts a socialist planned economic model, Europe and the UK doesn't. There will be points where you see how China does things and you think that it is inefficient and that it's causing problems for your business. The fact that you can't do e-contracts and everything has to be stamped and sent and you have to have a chart for everything. No, those are never going to change. If you ask for that to change, it's never going to change. It's a waste of your time and your budget. But if you are asking for things where there is a clear legal kind of route in which you should be entitled to it, then you'll probably get it.
Okay. Thanks. Any questions? And then maybe I don't see other questions. Then maybe we'll ask another one. You mentioned CCPIT, and actually this is also an organization in which we some chapters in which we cooperate at the USME Center. Of course, they have representations, as you mentioned, in different cities, but also in Europe. And sometimes SMEs in Europe come to us and say, hey, how can I get in touch with CCPIT? So of course there are websites, there are websites, there are phone numbers, but how does it work? I mean, do you just ring to the call them, or because sometimes these numbers are also they don't work, or they're not effective ways. How can you engage with these people? Like cold calls, or how? I
mean, call me old-fashioned, but I still think cold calls work really effectively. I often just make phone calls to various embassies, be it the Chinese embassy in the UK or foreign embassies here, and find that if you ask questions in a fairly direct, if you just phone the main number and then you just ask questions in a fairly direct way, that you can get answers. Find it helps if you ask in a very confident way and you say, could I have, you get through to the switchboard and you say, now I would like to speak to the private secretary of the first secretary for trade. Chances are, because you've asked in a confident way and you know the terms, you know the language, you'll get through. And then once you're through, you have an opportunity to take that conversation further I find that normally the Chinese embassy, at least in London, is very responsive. And my kind of advice would be to contact your local embassy with a view to finding somebody that you can start a localized relationship with and put questions to.
Very good. We have one question here. Opens local government to incorporate proposals from foreign business organizations. Can I add something? I see many business organizations, I'm not sure if you see that's the same, but they collect comments on draft regulations and then they put them together and send it to the, this is very common. And actually I also was wondering about the same thing, how effective do you think? Are these comments really reflected into legislation that you will see later?
I mean, we obviously do a lot of our work too, and I think it depends. And again, it comes back to what are you asking for? Are you asking for things where there is a political imperative against it? So, I mean, CBBC recently put a view from business into the State Council about a lack of direct flights between the UK and China. And of course, we took the input of our members and we put it through. There's a very well written proposal, if I to say myself, but the odds of that affecting change are very low, because there was obviously a political reason as to why there are no direct flights between the UK and China, and that is because China was maintaining very strict COVID regulations, and that is its right to do so. But when we put comments through on things such as, we put one through about the export control law, on the data security law, we find that there are definitely you can see examples of where businesses have managed to change bits of legislation.
Sorry to interrupt. Businesses like including foreign businesses or
foreign businesses? Because obviously we only put in points coming from businesses. So I can point to a few instances where UK companies managed to affect various pieces of regulation, various standards, but it all comes back to, how I say, taking a very scientific legal approach to what you're asking. There have to be a clear, rational reason for why your point is persuasive. So, I mean, often it's just, well, it's just genuinely better. So one of the standards on overhead electrification in China was recently changed, I think, by a German firm, because what they were proposing was just genuinely better. And it went in, it was reviewed, and we know it gets reviewed because we obviously put it in English and Chinese, and then we obviously hear that they're translating the English version to the Chinese, so we know that people are working on it and it's being read. So I think it is just a question of, has what you've submitted got any kind of practical benefit, and does it make sense under China's legal and regulatory frameworks? If yes, then you probably have a good chance of affecting some change.
Very good. And I think one of the key advantages of business organization is that SMEs don't even have to speak the language well, because there will be staff in business organizations translating your idea into Chinese, which is the key aspect of it. All right, I would maybe end this part now. Of course, if there are other questions on this topic, on these presentations for Joe, please write them in the chat, and we will have another Q&A session at the end. Now we'll move into the second presentation, and it is my great pleasure to have Mr. Robert Magyar with us today. Robert is a senior executive director of at Sandpiper North Head, which is a very renowned consultancy firm operating in China. And Robert has many years of experience in this area. He also used to live in Japan for many years, and maybe you can introduce yourself more in a better way.
Yes.
So I will thank you again for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alessio, and you're quite right. I have been here in China for 12 years now, working in government relations and advising companies, and before that, doing it in Japan. also with some experience from the US and Europe. And we are talking about European SMEs mainly today. I'm Hungarian, so I feel that I also have kind of some home knowledge about small mid-sized companies as well. But just a few more words about Sandpiper Northhead. As you mentioned, we are a consultancy working in public affairs, government relations, and strategic communications, and we work with very big companies. And we also work with companies that are fairly small, often just a couple of or even one representative in China, helping them on their communications and government relations. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about, what are the best practices and kind of how government relations function in China. So just some insights about government engagement in general, although Joe has also spoken to this point. But I think, instinctively, I think people know that government is important for business, but even more so in China. I think if you want to be successful, working with the government is a very important element of your work. And especially today, where the political and economic and social aspects of life kind of all mixed together. We are talking about national security, often in cultural terms. It's important to understand what the government is thinking and how your organization can fit into the mixture of a specific economic environment, political environment like China. If your business is more technical, you're going to have probably a lot of regulations that you have to deal with. If your business is fairly complex, then there is a chance that it's also fairly crisis-prone. So in terms of making sure that you are doing your best and achieving your objectives, but also that you defend yourself from crises and issues, it's very important to have an understanding of government engagement and public affairs in general. And the last thing I would say is that public affairs and government engagement is really not a one-person job. If you are in China and you have executives here, or you have manufacturing here, then often the engaging government goes kind of all through the company, from the very top, often quite to the bottom level of business units, because it's just important that at every level you are engaged, and you will find that you have to be engaged often. So just some more characteristics about being in China. As I said, in China, government can be all-encompassing in terms of they are the regulator, they are the legislator, they are often vendors to your company, they can be customers or even competitors in some of the segments where you are due to the state-owned enterprises. So when you consider that, understanding how the government functions is important. Also, just earlier, there was a discussion about, whether government takes comments and proposals from companies or other business organizations. And here, maybe my second bullet point is important. Government basically thinks in their own priorities. So understanding what they want to do is very important. And if you have proposals to improve that, if you have proposals or ideas that can help them to be more effective to reach their own priorities, they will always listen. And so when we work with companies, we always say, it's not a question of what you want to do, it's really a question what the government wants to do and how you can match that. That is important to think of. You can be a very small company, but if you are, if you have information, you have experience, you have products, ideas that can help the government at the local level or central level to reach their targets and objectives, then they will sit down with you and they will listen to you and you know, give a good hearing to your proposal. Now, whether they're going to take everything wholesale, that normally doesn't happen, and there is a good reason for that. We have experts on the government side as well, and they will think about proposals very closely and in detail. But if they find something good that works with their system, they will use it. The other thing I would say that it's important to engage with the government, you know, in a orchestrated fashion. Often business organizations, chambers are very useful, industry associations, working with experts, academia, you know, who can help you to advocate for your business or for your products, for your ideas is important. And the last thing on this slide, but I think it's probably the most important thing, is that you have to think about the level where you want to engage. Having the photo op with a minister or a party secretary of a province or a city might seem like a big achievement, but in reality, it probably will give you very little. You have to engage the government entities at a working level so that, you know, again, they can work with you and expand the relationship and kind of have a long-term relationship rather than, you know, one photo op and then put a picture on your wall. You think that they will come and help you when there's an issue. That's not going to happen. But if you are engaging at the working level, you will get ideas on how to resolve issues and crises, and again, how to have a constructive relationship. The next thing I wanted to talk about briefly is what we call the policy cascade in China. And if you are a big company, it means that, you know, you can kind of work with the government at many different levels to influence policy and talk to them, and kind of, you know, if you have a lot of resources to engage with them in many different ways. If you are a small company, then it's important to understand, you know, what are the different touch points where you can engage. And maybe there is only one element in all this cascade where you are able to engage with the government. But it's important where that point is, and, you know, you can get ready for it and understand what they do. Policy cascade basically means that the government works in a very organized fashion here when they think about regulations and policies. At the top level, basically what they do, they think about the main direction. And for example, you know, if you talk about the 14th five-year plan, the national government will issue a government report, and then cascading from that report, all the agencies, all the ministries will prepare their report. The organizations that are under the ministries will go into even more detail and prepare their work plan for 5 years, you know, going from the national level to the provincial and city level. Again, they will break it down into more tangible objectives and activities that they will do through the next 5 years. So this can be quite detailed when you get to the bottom. And again, that's where, you know, you can engage with the different agencies and say, all right, we understand this is the main direction. We think that doing this, or, you know, changing the regulation in a certain way will actually help you to achieve what the government at the central level is setting down. So following this cascade, you know, if you have resources to plug into it, you can do it at several levels. Just coming back to kind of very basic elements, you know, once you understand how the system works, you have to think about, of course, how to engage, right? How to influence and engage authorities. I think what Joe was talking about is very important. You're not going to do that after one meeting or after, you know, doing one visit or something like that. There needs to be long-term engagement, regular communications with the people that you want to engage with, and that requires resources. But even if you are one person or, you know, just a few people in China, you can do that. And I will talk about it a little bit later, that, you know, then you have to prioritize. Obviously, you cannot jump on every opportunity. You you have to make a strategy on how you will engage in a long-term and regular fashion, right? Now, of course, you can just not walk up to a government official, although I like the idea of cold calls that Joe was talking about, and I agree, it does often work, but one call will not bring you anything. You still have to build up a longer term discussion. So you have to have a good reputation. You have to have something where you look trustworthy. And often, creating that trust actually requires quite a bit of work. And I wouldn't necessarily even call that government relations or public affairs. It's just general communications, or your product being trusted, your technology being trusted, and communicating about this. Earlier, we had a little discussion about the different ways, and for example, just building up a corporate reputation through the media, through talking to experts. That can be one way to do that. So there is a step-by-step kind of process here that people have to take in order to get to the point where you can engage on various issues. If you have a lot of resources, you can do a lot. And this slide basically shows from the very basic elements of how government relations and public affairs is usually built up through the activities at the top. So if you have the resources, you need to do your research. Again, Joe has talked about this. It's very important that you do it. It's not a one-time job. Regular monitoring is important because this is a very dynamic environment. It depends, of course, which industry you are in. Some of the sectors are fairly stable, but if you are in healthcare, if you are in technology, if you are in finance, you will find, or nutrition, food-related, agriculture, you will find that policy making is very dynamic. Regulatory environment is very dynamic from the central level to the local level. So, doing the monitoring, analyzing what's happening, doing the stakeholder mapping. Who are your most important stakeholders inside the government and outside the government? Often it's not talking to the government, but talking to the right advisors who then speak to the government on your behalf, who are even more important than doing government. Based on the information you collect and you analyze, you can build a strategy. You can build your messages. Basically, what are you going to talk about? If an issue is important for you, do you have the data to support it? Do you have the proof points? Do you have the international experience that you can present to the Chinese government? It's very important. And then you can move into the different activities. And again, if you have a lot of resources, you can do a lot. If you have very limited resources, then I would go back to what Joe said, and Alessio also spoke about it earlier, working with business groups, councils, chambers, who have already relations with the government, who can help you with collecting information, who can help you to write comments on, regulations that are coming out, so on and so forth. I would also say industry associations, which if you are able to join an industry association in China, that's a very good position to be in, because they are what I call quasi-government organizations. They feel that they are part of the government, even if they are advocating on behalf of the industry. They will have their own channels that are very solid, and they can be used, and they can use it on your behalf and join these industry or professional organizations. No matter whether you are a company with several thousand people and a huge public affairs and government relations team, or whether you are one person or a few people in China, you still need to understand how government relations actually fits into business internal, right? So this slide is helping to understand that. You have your business objectives. Now, what are the issues? What are the topics? What are the regulations that will help you or hinder you in achieving that. That's number one. Number two, who are the people, who are the agencies, who are the government entities who can again help you or hinder you in achieving your business objectives. Once you understand that, you can do the monitoring, and do the stakeholder mapping, and you can kind of build up the regular communication and contact with the people who are important for you. And then on the other side, on the other end of this slide, you can see that if you have, for example, communications function inside your company, they can also help you to even amplify further your public affairs work by talking to the media, again, building the corporate reputation. So again, public affairs, government relations is not a standalone function. It works together with other functions inside the company. It's very important that the strategy is built together. You cannot just sit down and say, I'm going to be doing government relations, and this is what I want to do. It's important to understand what your executives, what your business unit leaders, what the head of your manufacturing side is doing, and how they see their environment. And this is just another kind of representation of what I am talking about. The team, even if you are a one-person team, has very clear tasks that need to be done, right? You need to understand your environment, you need to build a strategy on it, and then execute. Execution can take a lot of time, and you might think, I know this is what I want to do, but that can be dangerous. If you think that you know what you need to do, then it's better to go back and again, just do a little bit of analysis in the current environment. Is this really the best thing that we can do? Joe has spoken about earlier, you might think that the most important thing for you is to, for example, talk about how your products are registered and approved in China. But if this is a major issue, you can be sure that other companies are also thinking about that. So should you use your time to do the same thing that other bigger companies are already doing? That's a decision you have to make. Do you have the resources really to be spent on something that other bigger companies are also struggling? Maybe then that's not the best way to use your time and your resources, but do things at the local level might be more useful, right? So these are all very important decisions that companies have to do, and the smaller you are, the more impactful this decision will be. You have to put in time when you are meeting people, but you also have to put in time when you are researching. So again, just thinking through these issues is very important. And following up on what I just said, often what we do is we look at trying to analyze what are the issues that you should be engaging. If you have a lot of resources, you can maybe engage on a dozen different issues. If you don't have a lot of resources, then I would suggest that you use this chart that I have on the current slide to think about what is the impact and what is kind of the ability to influence when you think about a specific issue. Even though the impact might be high, for example, if you could change the tax regulations, that would have a huge impact on your company. But the ability to influence that as a single company is very, very difficult. So I would argue that it's probably not worth spending your time on something like that, right? If, however, you feel that you have an influence because the technology that you are talking about is very unique and you have international experience that no one else has, then maybe that's something that you should spend time on and make sure that your resources are directed in that way. So I find that with some very simple analysis, you can often manage to avoid spending time on issues where you just won't have any traction. The other very, I would say, useful and important tasks that you need to do if you are engaging with government is think through the messaging, to always be prepared and have proof points and data that can support your argument, and then have a very good record keeping in terms of what you are doing and who you are doing. If you are a foreign company in China, you will be looked at as a foreign company. So engaging with the government, although it's very important, it can be also very sensitive. I always recommend that any engagement is recorded on paper, even if it's kind of memo that you write afterwards, who you were meeting with, what was discussed, so that if there are any questions later on, you can answer those questions and make sure that you have all the information that you need. And government relations can be quite sensitive. So record keeping is very important. I will open up for questions, but I also have, a few kind of points that I wanted to make one more time before I end my presentation. And number one, is know your industry. Understand the position of your industry in China. Is it a sensitive industry? You might think it's not sensitive, but again, Chinese environment can be very tricky. When Joe was talking about soil and talk about food, anything related to agriculture, anything related to obviously technology, for example, is very important. But then there are other businesses that are seemingly much more relaxed. For example, if you think about healthcare and senior care, especially, is an area where China has fairly little experience and they are very open to new ideas. I would say you need to understand what you are working. So that's number one. Number two, set your priority. Everybody has limited resources. Go back and make sure that your priorities are set in the right way and you are not wasting your time and your money. And then number three, build alliances. Build alliances through the business organizations, through the professional organizations. Work with Chinese companies, work with your vendors, or work with your customers if they are business entities, because it might be easier to actually engage the government with their help and as a group rather than one business entity. So I think I will stop there, and I will be very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Robert, for the great presentation. And again, I would invite all the audiences to make questions. Robert is a very senior government affairs professional, so you have an incredible chance to ask him questions. I have one comment, which I really agreed on. Let's say when you were talking about industrial associations, this is also something we do at the USME Center, of course, even though we are a small kind of entity. But we also know companies that do the same. Like working with industrial associations is very, very important because, as you mentioned, sometimes they can be everything. And some of these associations make standards, and some of these associations advise on regulations, sit on expert bodies that advise the government regulations. So we call them multiplier of everything. So my question is how, maybe also this relates to the cold calls we were talking about before. How do you actually get to know them? Like how, still the cold call thing, or maybe are there some events or some venues which are more appropriate than others?
Yeah.
What we recommend?
Yes, definitely. I think, getting in touch with industry associations or various organizations and professional bodies, I think best way to do it if you have kind of you haven't done it, before and you want to establish contact is through some kind of events. I mean, China is really a market where you have trade shows and conferences and seminars in, every single sector and, technological area that you can think about. So signing up for something like that, as an observer, going there in person, of course, if you can, meeting people is the best way to do that, to establish some contact. And again, I think if you are a business entity and you find an industry association that works in your area, you do a little bit of research. Do they really represent the objectives and the priorities that are important for you? And if that's the case, talk to them how you can become a member. Sometimes, these groups are fairly expensive, but if you are a small company, there are ways to participate, even if you don't become a full member, or there are ways when the membership fee is actually smaller for SMEs, right? So I think it's important to do that. But the one thing I would say, though, that goes back to your point and what I said earlier, these are quasi-government entities. So if you are going to engage on a point that is very sensitive to the government, then you will find that even though the industry association is supposedly representing the industry, talking points, they might in fact be closer to the government's position than your position. So that's just an important thing to remember. There are also associations in China who are specifically working with multinational companies or foreign companies, and they might be, structured in a way where they can be a little bit more critical to the government. But it's important to remember, if you are working with a Chinese association, they are quasi-government. So sometimes I say in China, everybody is the government. So, everybody likes to think that, they can participate and they can share the ideals of the government, and that's a great thing. But it also means that when it comes to critical issues, and I don't mean politically critical issues, but just, technologically even critical issues, they might not necessarily want to carry water for you, foreign groups. So just remember that.
Right. And maybe if I can also make another comment on top of that.
Sure.
I think in our experience, we used to work to monitor a lot of standard setting organizations, and we actually were very surprised that in most cases these are very transparent. They have articles of associations on their website. You go there, they say the fee is this and that. So yeah, sometimes it's pretty transparent. And maybe another question that I would like to ask, you mentioned going to events in person if you have the opportunity. Would you have, let's say, well, I think the answer might be a bit easier, but like Chinese personnel or foreign, let's say, vice president or like foreign expert who, sometimes they don't understand much or not as much as Chinese person. What's your suggestion?
So that is a difficult question, because I think it really depends on the specific issue, on the specific engagement, and I don't really want to have I don't have a general rule on this. I think it's good to have resources, both foreign and Chinese, in terms of personnel, because often the discussion needs to take place in Chinese. And I agree with Joe, it's very important to have that language ability, not only to understand what's going around with you, but also to make your point. I mean, if you are talking about a serious issue, you need to do that yourself, even if you belong to CBBC or another group. You will have chances where you can talk to the government directly. If you can do that in Chinese, that's great. There are other instances where an issue is fairly sensitive, where a foreigner actually can break through that by either not understanding the rules or pretending not to understand the rules. Yeah, the dumb foreigner. Yes, that's stereotype, that we all have, and it does still work sometimes. But I wouldn't say it works all the time. Sometimes people get very offended. So you need to be very careful how to use that, and to kind of understand the environment around. But I want to go back to one point that you mentioned. Government relations, when it comes to especially looking at policies and regulations and how sausage is made, right? It's actually fairly transparent in China, and it's very well organized. So I would say, you have an environment where policies and regulations are made in a very structured manner. If you understand that, you will know where you can come in and provide, comments or experience or ideas. often the regulatory bodies and the legislative bodies, they actually call for comments. And China is one of those countries where even if you are a foreign company, you can make comments. There are, this is not normal in many places. You can be a foreign company and provide very direct comments into the legislative or into the regulatory process, right? So I would say if you have a chance to use that, you should be using it. If you have the resources to do that, you should be using it. If you don't have the resources, then work with the chambers, work with the different groups who have the resources to do that. Because again, it's fairly transparent and structured. So, if I would say if you have pertinent points to make, you have all the opportunities to do that.
Right. Okay. No, this is very insightful. And I see there still are no questions. So again, I would invite you again to submit questions. While we wait, I would take this opportunity to ask another one. And of course, you join if you have questions, please. But maybe in the meantime, I will ask one because this is something that happened to us. And going back again to the role of industrial associations, we were meeting with one of these associations a couple of months ago in the creative industries, right? So it was mostly everything was about business, how we could do like matchmaking events, this kind of stuff. And then at some point, we mentioned, let's say, one country that it's in Europe, which they don't particularly, let's say, welcome. And even if it was an industry association talking about business, no. That is something. So they still need to follow like the political, let's say, thing. And my question here is, what if you are, an SME, even a very technologically advanced SME, from one of those countries which are not going through, let's say, very positive relations with China at the moment? What can you do? Because in my experience, I think they have no way at all to engage with you. These people will avoid them. So what do you do?
Conquer them. And that's all I can say. I think it's very difficult to overcome these political situations where, a country and businesses from a specific country are targeted, not necessarily because the businesses have done anything, just the political environment between two countries. I think it's important to, make sure that you emphasize that you are here as a business, not representing your country. But of course, that argument might not go very far. I think if you have a good reputation and if your previous engagements were positive and you built up contacts, I think you might be in a situation where you can maintain your business at the same level, not necessarily grow, but what is happening between two countries might not necessarily influence you in a negative way. But it is also true that it's very hard to kind of reach new objectives and grow when that environment is present. It is, normally it lasts for a few months, and if you can get through that, then you are able to do business. What I would also say though, once the difficult times are over, normally there is very little residue of that sentiment. So once the word is that you can engage with this country, you can engage with the specific, businesses from that country again, then things go back to normal fairly.
Okay.
I don't know if Joe, you have other, different experience on this, but
I think this is the benefit of business organizations. Just to kind of spice things up, I will controversially disagree. Sure. But only because, and this is the example of the UK. So the UK relationship with China is on ice at the moment. There has not been a bilateral meeting 2 years, the kind of traditional vehicle for getting licenses and raising points. And CBBC has, not to blow our own trumpet, never been in more demand for bilateral meetings. Because when we come, we're not the government. We're representing British businesses. And an odd statistic that I've noted a lot of countries in China have in their trade relationship is when the relationship, political relationship, is struggling, exports from that market actually go up. It certainly did in the UK. It has been with Australia. It did in the UK in 2012 when David Cameron hosted Dalai Lama, and it has been for Australia. And I don't have kind of scientific reason for that. I have a theory, but it's if you're a UK exporter and you know that the relationship is going through a rocky patch, you then work doubly hard in your advocacy and government affairs. And that means that you're actually more successful than you were previously. But there is this recognition that companies are coming to communicate as companies, and there are limits. You will not get headline licenses. Those are not what SMEs are typically asking for. But you might find that working level communications with the Labour Bureau, the Tax Bureau, have no are not affected by the government relationship. And we've had meetings, as I mentioned, with Li Keqiang, MOFCOM, the Beijing government, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, all sending their vice mayor to meet with us. These are high-level engagements, which our members have clearly been on the list, and engagement's been good. So it's probably worse if you're a large MNC than if you're an SME, the political relationship.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think size does matter, and if you're a small company, you're probably not that effective. I mean, if you look at the Australia-China relations now, it is just really, really difficult, and all businesses are, there is, in terms of kind of creating new engagements, whether at the commercial level or government relations level, it's just very, there's no question about it. It is also true that, it depends how many engagements are between countries, right? The history is very long and there are a myriad, engagements already. Obviously, they will not all stop and they will not be all affected at the same level. But again, I think it is hard to get over that in a very visible way. You can get under it maybe if you're a small company and you're not visible, you're not necessarily affected.
Okay, very good. Question? Any questions? All right. I mean, I don't see any questions, so this is the last chance the audience has. Otherwise, or maybe if you have something to add.
Well, there's one point I'll add that's not a question, but it's just a kind of a strategy, something that we've been working on at CBBC that I think is often overlooked, at least it has been by British SMEs, is the talking to your local MP, talking to your local newspaper to talk up the China market, if that is an area that you are keen to export more to. Because I think there is perhaps imposter syndrome amongst, and I'm talking about small businesses. So I'm aware that some of the companies we have on the line are quite large. I'm talking if you're kind of a small, actual kind of company of under like 200, and you're in a local area, and then you may feel that speaking to your MP is too abstract, or that writing a piece in your local newspaper is not going to move the dial at all, because who is reading the Northern Echo? But actually your local MP will be reading the Northern Echo, and other people are reading the Northern Echo. The Northern Echo, of course, exists because it has readership. And your local MP, will be, often we find that MPs are interested in what their constituents are saying, and it does ring through that MPs are there to serve their constituents and that they are a good vehicle for getting stuff into government. And if you're a local business owner, you have the right to speak to your MP. And I would recommend making an appointment and having that conversation. They may be, like certain MPs in the UK are, running a parliamentary export program, whereby they are actively trying to it's not just China in the case of the UK, grow exports to other markets. You don't know what you're missing out on until you've kind of seen what there is. That they may say, we're not doing anything, we're not, I am as an MP ideologically not interested in China. They might come back and say that I'm very interested in China. You might even find out that your local MP is the minister for China within the government. You just didn't know, because these are not very well advertised positions for MPs to hold. But I think that is worth pursuing. As long as the cold calls, it's perhaps a very old-fashioned way of doing advocacy, but I think it's worth a shot.
Very good. Thank you. We don't have questions. So I would just move forward. We have this QR code here is for. We would appreciate if you could take 1 minute of your time to. It's a feedback questionnaire where you can also actually propose topics for other workshops in the future. We have a few workshops to do in the next 2 to 3 months. So we would appreciate any suggestions on what we would like us to do. So I think it was the last slide. The last slide. Well, I mean, it was a thank you slide. Yeah. So yeah, if there are no other questions, of course, you can reach out to us anytime by email, by WeChat, any channels, and yeah, you can ask any questions you have. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and then we look forward to see you at the next event. Thank you.